picture, the algorithms we're trying to integrate together within our architecture. And a lot of what we're doing in OpenCog is controlling these agents in virtual worlds. And I think we can learn a lot that way in terms of prototyping the various AI algorithms that we have and how they can work together. But ultimately, I think we need to go further. And we've started to collaborate with David Hansen, this sculptor and roboticist. So we have this cool little guy in our lab now, and are making our initial attempts to connect OpenCog to that. In 2009, OpenCog was used in Xiamen University to control Aldebaran Now robot. So there's a little bit of background there, but we're trying to do it better this time. And it's actually called DeSTIN, not Estin, but you can get the idea. So DeSTIN is a deep learning vision processing system developed by Itamar Arel, who has been at a number of the previous AGI conferences, who's a professor at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. And the philosophy underlying DeSTIN is fairly similar to Jeff Hawkins' HTM or to the earlier systems by Dalip George, who gives our keynote tomorrow morning. I'm not sure what Dalip is working on right now. We'll find out. But it's philosophically similar to these other deep learning hierarchical temporal memory type systems. Itamar got mad when I said his system was an HTM type system because he views that as the brand of Hawkins' system. So I made up the ugly acronym, a compositional spatial temporal deep learning system, which no one else will use. But that is what it is, right? It's a deep learning system. It's each node refers to a larger region of space-time than its child nodes, and the hierarchy is laid out according to space-time. So it's conceptually a bit like Hawkins' HTM, but all the mathematics is different. And it works much better than the version of Hawkins code that I downloaded and tried. I don't know everything that Hawkins is doing proprietary within his company. The general inspiration for this sort of deep learning system is the well-known hierarchical nature of visual cortex, auditory cortex, and many other parts of the brain, where they do seem to a significant extent to be working as hierarchical pattern recognition architectures where each layer in some way is largely recognizing patterns in the output of the layer below, conditioned on the state of the layer above. I mean, that's a great oversimplification of what happens in the brain, but it seems to be a useful abstraction to some extent. So you look at a processing architecture with multiple hierarchical layers where basically at the lower layer, each of these squares could refer to, say, 4 pixels in input or something, and then at the higher layer it would refer to 8 by 8 pixels rather, and then you keep going up, and time is represented in various different ways in different architectures. But the basic idea is as you go up, each node refers to a larger region of space-time, and in some ways recognizing patterns or making predictions about what will happen in that region of space-time, conditioned by its parent node. And DeSTIN is one among many architectures of that sort. It's the one that I chose to work with partly because it's open source code and I knew Itamar, and I found the algorithm relatively simple. I mean, the essential action of DeSTIN is clustering. So I mean, inside each node, there's a fairly k-means-like, although not exactly k-means, online clustering algorithm that maintains a pool of centroids here representing the patterns that have come in. But what's being clustered in each node is the output of the previous nodes plus an abstraction of the output of the child nodes plus an abstraction of the state of the parent node plus potentially an external signal, say the inference about what's there by some other learning mechanism connected to this. So you're clustering parent state, abstraction of child state, and external signal, and you're finding clusters among those on multiple levels. So since information is propagating both up and down, in principle you have a quite complex nonlinear dynamical system there. Now, Itamar believes that this sort of hierarchical system ultimately can be made to yield human-level general intelligence. And Jeff Hawkins and others have made similar statements. I can't rule that out entirely, but I'm somewhat skeptical, but as an integrative AGI architect, I'm looking at using this as more of a perceptual cortex and trying to link it in with OpenCog and its more cognitive semantic network. So one problem that I've thought about a bunch in this context, let's say you took a picture of, just to be concrete, say you took a picture of Marcus Hutter's face, but then let's say you stretched it, so like the eyes were way out here or something. You can all visualize that. Now, you would probably all recognize that as Marcus because you've been seeing him give talks. But in its simplest form, an architecture like this is not going to recognize that as Marcus. No? I wouldn't say it's impossible to make it do that, but in the forms that they're around now, that they won't do that. They may be translation invariant, if you're really lucky, rotation invariant somehow, but they're not nonlinear morphing invariant. But yet, we recognize abstractions, like, okay, there's eyes that are next to each other, there's usually a nose below that, usually a mouth below that, and we can somehow use these abstractions to recognize general shapes of faces, even if the exact proportions aren't there. And how do you do that? Well, there's certainly a lot of ways to do that. You could probably do that by beefing up the hierarchy somehow. The way we've chosen to do that is to try to abstract patterns from here into a more abstract semantic network where you can then recognize spatial relations and reason on them, which is not the only way to go, but it's one interesting way to do things. And we're also trying similar things with a motor control hierarchy, which I won't find time to talk about here. One thing we found in general in OpenCog is you can never just take someone else's algorithm or architecture and integrate it with your stuff. I mean, ultimately you have to dig into it and change around a large number of things to make it actually work in the way that you want. Partly because people take shortcuts in building things, and partly because integration gives rise to new requirements. So the changes we've made to Destined so far, in Itamar's design, each node, each little square has a separate set of centroids. We've made it share centroids across the different nodes and the different layers. He had a fixed number of centroids, but we need to dynamically add or delete centroids because we're using it in a lifelong learning context rather than for one-off machine learning problems. And most relevant to this talk, we're doing some frequent subgraph mining. So if you expose many, many, many different pictures to the Destined hierarchy, save the Destined states there, we recognize frequent subtrees in that collection of Destined states. And these subtrees and their relationships are then fed into the OpenCog system. And this shows a two-dimensional self-organizing map Cahonin net representation of way too few centroids. Like these are the centroids in the higher dimensional space of some Destined node projected in 2D. The yellow ones are the centroids, the blue ones are individual observations. You can see some of the observations are near the centroids in the high dimensional belief vector space. Some observations are way out there with no centroids. So in our version, you would then add some new centroids, most likely. So, yeah, we connect Destined to OpenCog by saving the Destined states in a state database, recognizing frequent subtrees from there, and feeding those frequent subtrees into OpenCog. Then things that OpenCog has learned can be used as extra signals to be fed into Destined's nodes, which are then used as part of their states within the clustering. So here's a reconstruction of what Destined sees have a hand at different layers, not too different from other hierarchical systems. Now in the next 4 minutes, I'll quickly run through the simple experiment. Actually, I have 5 minutes and 28 seconds according to my timer. But the simple experiment described in the paper. You feed in some simple shapes like this. This shows the centroids and all the different layers, from the most detailed to the most abstract layer. So the centroid, to be accurate, it shows the shapes which represent the means of the higher order probability distributions that are the centroids. Really, the first layer is distributions, second layer is distributions of distributions, third layer is distributions of distributions of distributions. But if you want to look at them, you just have to propagate the mean all the way down, and then you get something that looks like a reasonable shape. And the frequent subtrees that you mine from a bunch of Destined hierarchies end up looking like basic portions of the letter forms. So if your inputs are these letters, the frequent subtrees in Destined state, when you project them down into pictures, look like parts of letters, which is what you'd pretty much expect, then in this simple case, if you feed it into OpenCog, you can treat the trees as concepts. Like these images match those trees. So in OpenCog's logic language, we can say, there's a contained in relation between each of the trees, which is an abstract pattern in the image, and you can then get logical relations out of this. Say there's a property, has tree 0, has tree 7. Certain images have different subtrees in them. I don't have time and no one can read that, but you can do basic, simple logical inference in OpenCog's probabilistic term logic. Then you can reason about how similar different images are based on the subtrees that they have in them, and which regions of images look like special cases of which other ones. So you can do basic logic on the collection of subtrees that were recognized in different images. And the advantage of this is, of course, you're doing a lot of information compression. Here the frequent subtrees are basically the corners and edges of the square, so you can use that, track the frequent subtrees moving around to track an object around, which is a fairly trivial case. I mean, our goal with this is robot vision, and we are, while this paper focused on very simple letter forms, we are feeding into it like stuff from stereo vision in a webcam with depth perception and color vision and so forth, and they're now in the middle of fiddling with it to get it to work well in that context. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But the basic idea is that to get a logical reasoning engine or Moses or any of these more symbolic-ish, higher-level learning methods in OpenCog to work on high-dimensional sensory data from, say, vision or audition, we've got to abstract it somehow or other. The way we've chosen to abstract it is to do this frequent pattern mining on the states of a subsymbolic hierarchical temporal memory like architecture, which is, I'm not necessarily claiming that's how the brain does it, although I wouldn't be shocked if the brain did something you could argue was loosely analogous to it. But it appears so far that it's going to work okay for basic object and event recognition for robots, which is what we're trying. But we're still at the beginning of this, and it was a significant architectural choice to go this way of taking like a separate deep learning perception architecture and hook it into OpenCog. But so far it seems like a reasonable choice, and I think we're going faster this way than if we tried to do vision processing using the other OpenCog tools. And that's all.
Questions?
Ben, two short questions. First, in Destined, do you do anything about color histograms besides shapes?
Yes.
Okay, and second question on the previous topic. With that Facebook analysis, what kind of particular program was learned for Facebook analysis? So was it like Boolean regression or something more complicated?
It was Boolean functions.
Okay.
And we did a bunch of NLP before that to get the features fed in.
So there was a program for NLP analysis as well?
Yeah. I mean, we used this sort of shallow parser.
Okay.
It wasn't just words; it was words and then particular kinds of phrases, and the way we tuned the NLP was somewhat domain specific, and then the Moses was pretty much just plain vanilla Boolean program learning. But you had to tune; it was an ensemble of programs. You had to tune the diversity penalty and the Occam razor penalty with much effort. Huh?
So I think this is very cool, and I might be able to use it in some problems I have looking at bat skulls
Cool.
from various species where it's very hard. We've been trying to use the deformable parts models. I don't know if you know about DPMs, but
No.
it's a kind of support vector machine idea that was developed by, I'll lose the names now, Felsenswab, yeah, I think, Pedro Felsenswab. And it's kind of the state of the art right now in like finding people in images. But it's kind of, it sort of assumed, it wouldn't be able to handle stretching the eyes out because it has sort of a preferred location for the eyes, the nose, the mouth, the arms, and things like this. And so making the deformable part models actually more deformable is an open problem. So it would be fun to do a head-to-head comparison against DPMs, because I think you probably
Head
would.
to head, all right. Yeah.
Well, or maybe body to body.
Right.
Something more deformable than a head actually would be good.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But very cool, very interesting.
More questions? Yep.
So one of the things that that Hawkins talks about is the idea of how that we tend to more predict the way that the world is, and then we kind of like look for exceptions to our predictions, and that is kind of like, it's almost like a top down, and then responding to differences from our expectations. So are you applying or thinking about applying the Destined type of model to not just symbolic, but to more general symbolic types of ideas, or other types of cognitive or semantic?
Not really. I mean, if you abstract it enough, then OpenCog already has that, because we do clustering in the atom space, and when you recognize a cluster in the atom space, that becomes a concept node that's fed back in, and you can do clustering involving that already. So I mean, the hierarchical cluster learning is already in there. What's unique about the Destined type architecture is that the learning is integrated with a spatio-temporal hierarchy.
So it's the spatial.
Yeah, it's that you have data which has a hierarchical structure in space and in time, and so you have an architecture that mirrors that structure internally. And if you're dealing with mathematics or human relations or something, there's certainly still a hierarchical character to it, but it's not a spatio-temporal character. So it's not clear why you want like square lattices and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Okay, last one.
Thank you for that. There is a figure in the paper which illustrates these patterns you recognize with Destined. There are 7 layers, and yes.
This one?
Yeah. Am I getting right that it is a visualization of subtrees that you...
No, those are not subtrees. Those are the centroids, in a way. I mean, you take, so basically on each layer, what you have is a probability distribution over belief vectors coming from the lower layer. So the belief vector coming from a lower layer consists of the states in each of the 4 child nodes of the lower layer, plus something from the state of the parent layer, right? So you have these belief vectors from the child and parent layer, and then you have centroids relating them. And then as a new observation comes in, it has a distance to each centroid in its node, and then the distances to the centroids in the node are turned into a probability distribution. So if you really had to cash it all out, like at the first layer, it's a distribution over observations. At this, let's even ignore feedback for now and just think about propagating straight up, just to make it simpler. If you're propagating straight up the hierarchy, then what you have is on this layer, an observation comes in, it gets a probability distribution. On this layer, it gets a distribution over distributions. On this layer, it gets a distribution, a third order probability distribution, a distribution of distributions of distributions. I mean, it's not represented that way in the code, but mathematically, that's what it would have to be. And then you keep on going up the hierarchy. Now, you can't visualize that whole thing. That would be a big pain, right? Yeah. So what you do is you recursively represent each distribution by its mean. And we actually use like a p power mean with p equals 3 or 4 in order to make it crisper and less blurry. So you you take a power mean of the power means of the power means of the power means of all the way down to the bottom, and then you get a single crisp picture, which kind of summarizes the mean of the distribution that you get from visualizing something.
How did you get to 7 layers? Have you did a lot of trials to come to it?
No, we didn't really do any trials. We just picked it. It's a nice number. Yeah.
And if you will continue to add layers, will it converge to a point?
Well, the thing is, if you
The
have
mean of all means.
I mean, if you have an input with a certain number of pixels, then it's fairly natural just to look at the logarithm, right? I mean, if you wanted to do something like that, take 2 by 2, 4 by 4, 8 by 8. I mean, I don't think you need more layers than that. You could potentially use less, but that would be a subject for experimentation. But there are enough other problems with the algorithm at present that we haven't messed with that too much. So.
Thank you.
Sorry, I have to close this exciting session. I think it was very interesting, but don't head off. In 25 minutes we have an exciting keynote talk by